So I'd like to begin with a prayer for our country. And this is the same one that I shared on Shabbat. It's by Rabbi Emily Cohen. It was transmitted through the Reconstructionist movement, and it's just one of many articulations um, that give us a chance to just send our good wishes for this nation. Let me just open that up. And feel free to say it with me if you like. Merciful One, you who gave us wisdom and understanding, you who placed within our hearts pounding the possibility of pursuit of justice, you who granted us keen senses and constant memory and each breath of life, may you give us, all of us, through the 202 score and 5-year red, white, and blue haze, the ability to see the truth. America has never yet been great. May this truth be made plain soon and in our lifetimes. May we place our feet on the path to remedy. May you build within us the right kind of stubbornness to craft John Lewis's good trouble, to pursue Dr. King's dream, to dissent even if society remains unready, to align ourselves against our blood-stained foundations, to speak out falsehoods with the unbroken blast of the shofar, to listen to those who know the same stories in another point of view, to listen to those who have fought for what we seek before we knew to seek it, to listen to our heartbeat, to listen to our condoning silence, to listen, Shema. All of we sacred wrestlers, may we begin the work of making America anew. May you give us the strength to let "that's just the way it is" fall away as an excuse. May you grant us the courage to sit with our culpability and our losses and our shame and be unafraid. May you help us to seek not greatness for its own sake, but great gentleness and growth, cradled in love, together, generation by generation, with all our heart, with all our strength, with all our essence, with all that animates our souls. And let us say, Amen. Tonight is the second of the 3 nights that we wanted to devote to, especially to looking at some of the work that was published, that was written and published by Herb Levine as we met him last week. He's not going to be with us tonight. He was not able to come to all 3 sessions, but he'll be here again next week. And the general rationale is we have 3 sessions with him to make the first one to focus on the liturgy of creation, the second one tonight to focus on the liturgy of revelation and really the question of how we understand revelation, and the third one next week to be on redemption. So tonight I want to look with you at a number of different questions that come up around what revelation means to us and then how we formulate our prayers around our understanding of revelation. Before we go to that, I just wanted to give a few minutes to debrief from last week. I know that there were a number of people last week who said they would not be able to come tonight, and so we'll sort of hold up their questions for them. And I guess I'd like to start by just saying, every experience is a learning experience. I thought that it would be important for me to give as fulsome and sort of clearly laying out as much as I could some thoughts that I have about liturgical change. I thought that would help deflate any concerns about the material we were looking at. And what I learned last week is that I think my opening comments had the opposite effect. I think that my experience of last week was that my comments, my remarks about liturgical change, now we're talking about liturgical change. We're not just talking about poetry. And so I guess I just want to put that on the table and ask for your input about that, and about anything else that you wanted to bring up from last week from our discussion of the creation liturgy or just the whole question of liturgical change. just gonna make some space here. Luther, go ahead. We'll start with you.
Well, from my perspective, I don't have trouble with liturgical change. Of course, the liturgy that we daven with is not something that I grew up with anyway,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So that isn't what concerned me at all. Um, then because we've had conversations that I struggle with the concept of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And that on one hand, my idea of prayer is very broad and it encompasses more than just words. Heschel said we pray with our feet, and I think sometimes we do that when we're hiking in the mountains
Mm-hmm.
as much as when we're marching in the street. But what if we're going to pray? What is it that we are praying to or for?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I struggled with,
Mm-hmm.
because I struggle with personification of a concept that we don't really have much of a proper name for to begin
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with. And
Well,
yet
we
I
have lots of
understand
names,
this
but yeah,
metaphor.
great. Okay, thank you. Carol, go ahead.
I was not here last week, but
Mm.
I have lots of views on this. And to answer Luther's question, I always go back to what Rabbi Ira said when he was asked about prayer. And he says, as long as you know that you are praying and then it's unilateral, it is all yours.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's perfect. So that why you're praying doesn't matter to whom it may concern that you're praying. You're
Mm-hmm.
praying for yourself. You're praying because you're praying. You're praying because you love the liturgy. You're praying because you love the poetry. And to me, if you look at our prayer book, it is a combination of poetry and it's a combination of liturgy. It's a combination of the classic liturgy and the new liturgy, and it's all liturgy. And I don't make any distinctions between poetry and liturgy because half of our liturgy is poetry,
Yes.
even the Hebrew
Mm-hmm.
and the Psalms and you name it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what Rabbi Ira said that's exactly what I think about prayer.
Thank you. So I never asked him this directly, but you're saying if we would say, Rabbi Ira, what about the sort of the central formula, Baruch Atah, blessed are you, which seems to want to indicate that there's a conversation of some kind going on. There's an interaction with another entity somehow. He would say that's what our
Well,
ancestors gave us.
it's an interesting question because I know we talked a bunch about, Marcia Falk versus Baruch Atah Adonai.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved Marcia Falk.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved, and he knew her and he encouraged her, as did Judith, his wife.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came right down to it, he said, we are never going to get away from the formulaic. As long as we want to connect with our history
Mm-hmm.
and be part of the Jewish people, it is important to say Baruch Atah Adonai.
Mm-hmm.
You can think of it however you think of it.
Right.
You can think of it as a translation of Marcia Falk,
Mm-hmm.
or as any of our new degenderized translations.
Mm-hmm.
But the formula connects us to the Jewish people, and we
Mm-hmm.
should not move away from it.
You're saying you're saying that, or
No, that's Ira.
Ira.
Ira's saying that.
Yeah, Audrey, I want to go to you next. I just want to share a memory of something I read long ago. This is really a long time ago. It was an interview between Rabbi Ira and Eric Kaplan with a C. So Eric Kaplan, just for those that don't know,
He's a Kaplan scholar.
Yes.
And Mordechai
He happens to
Kaplan
be
scholar.
a Mordechai Kaplan scholar whose name is Eric Kaplan, but he's not related. Different spelling of his name. And somewhere in the course of this interview, which was written out in a piece in print, he says to Rabbi Ira, so, given the years, the history that's unfolded and your years and your perspective on this, would you still change the Torah blessings? Would you still insist on removing Asher Bachar Banu? And I swear this on my child's head. In this piece, Rabbi Ira is at least quoted as saying, no, I would not change them. He says, as long as we're going to say Baruch Atah, and we know that that's metaphor, we can make anything into metaphor, and we can understand that Asher Bachar Banu doesn't have to mean what we rejected its meaning to be. Anyway, I just remember reading that, and I think Rabbi Ira had already passed away, so I guess it wasn't so many years ago, but I just remember having to pick my chin up off the floor.
Because he hated the Machzor.
Yes.
Absolutely hated it.
Yes.
Because it gave too many choices.
Right. He said, this is not a Machzor, it's an anthology.
Right. And he didn't want those choices. He said, we believe in something, we stand for something. So it's interesting that but he at one point when we had this discussion with Miriam and Ira, he said, I would not change anything else. Because she said, you just stopped. She said, and he said enough. So it's
well, I wish he could be in the room with us tonight because we're going to look at some other things. Okay, Audrey, and then Jerry will give you the last word, and then we'll move on.
Just real quickly, I would throw into that the way we say our Kiddush, because I know we have this struggle. We want to teach the Kiddush to our children, but a version we want to teach them is one that they'll be comfortable going out into the Jewish community and feeling comfortable saying it.
Right.
And I have to say, even in our household, we say the traditional Kiddush and not the Reconstructionist Kiddush. We kind of all look at each other. We know we're saying the wrong one or the wrong one, but we feel like this is the one that we were raised on that we're more comfortable with. So it's the same thing, but the intention is the same in our heads. I mean, it's what we think, not necessarily what we have to say. And I think it's something that we have to think about more actively in our prayer.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Audrey. Jerry, go ahead. Jerry, don't forget to unmute.
I regularly attended Rabbi Ira's Sunday night classes, and that issue came up a number of times. And I had the same impression as Carol, that Ira was, I think, partly because he recognized that we made a number of changes, but we didn't make them all. And so it was sort of arbitrary. Which ones do you make and which ones don't you? And so it wasn't so much that he thought my impression was not so much that he thought the changes was a mistake, but rather that it was so difficult to make a decision about which ones to make and how to make them, that perhaps just take the other point of view of keeping the ideas in your head rather than on the paper.
Right. Thank you. I of course, I hear the wisdom of that, and I have to also ask myself, I guess, I feel like it's part of it's not officially written into my job description, but I feel like part of my job in what I do at Adat Shalom is to try to open the Siddur for people, so make it easy for them to connect with it and to find some meaning in it. And I always feel like if it requires them to be expert yogis, like if they have to do 10 different poses in order to be able to say this phrase, then it's not, we have to figure out an easier, simpler way. If you have to tell yourself 10 different interpretations so that you can stay on the page, then maybe we should look at what's on the page. At least I'm sharing, that's my, one of my things that I wrestle with. Great, okay, thank you. I want to look with you at some questions about the Revelation liturgy, and I'm going to use as my example here this passage from the Torah service. And I want to share some thinking that I've shared in little bits before, but I don't think I've ever shared it in this fuller way. I'm borrowing from a session that I created in the fall of 2018 for the Reconstructionist Movement conference that we had in Philly. That was the fall of 2018? 18, okay, yes. So let me screen share. No, go away. Not yet. Here. Okay, can you all see this thing that says reconstructing Sinai in our prayers? Okay. And
It was-
Luther, I think you may have been at this session. And
It was
maybe.
easier to see when it was bigger. It's very hard to see when it's small.
Okay, okay.
Yes, well,
If you go up until the top of your screen where it says view options, you can make it any size you want.
I'm not seeing anything that says view options.
Or in the lower level, mine is the top of my computer screen. It says view.
Thanks,
Hang
that worked out.
I know how I can make it bigger. Hang on just a sec. I just won't, I won't put it in.
Rachel,
think we
people
can
can
do
do it
that.
themselves.
Yeah, we can do it ourselves. You don't have to do it, Rachel.
Yeah, Rachel,
Oh,
don't do
I
it.
see. You mean if you all go to your own screen and
Yes.
can you all do that? Shulamit, do you see that?
Yeah, she
Yeah,
said she saw
I
it.
followed the instructions and I got that.
Okay,
So view options at the top, and then it scrolls down and you can see different sizes.
okay.
You can also move the page with your little hand.
You can, even though I'm screen sharing?
Yes.
Great, okay. All right, well, I hope this is accessible visually. I'm just gonna start with this passage from Eric Kaplan's book, again, Kaplan with a C. So his book is called From Ideology to Liturgy, and he lays out the process by which the Reconstructionist editors took their thinking and tried to translate it into decisions about liturgy, about what goes into the prayer book and what doesn't. So to start here at the top of the page, this is now Eric Kaplan speaking or writing. As Mel Skult has written, Mel Skult, as I think you all know, is, I guess, the premier biographer of Kaplan and was just with us at Adat Shalom just before the new year. Intellectual honesty was one of the cornerstones of Kaplan's value system. Although words are inadequate for describing the mysteries of the universe, that is no, now in Kaplan's words, excuse for making assertions about life which are inconsistent with experience. So we should look at whether we're using that as an excuse. While perpetuating historical Judaism was a clear goal of Kaplan's philosophy, he believed that modern Judaism must state clearly where it differs from the Judaism of the past. The refusal to alter tradition in light of modern belief and values is a dangerous form, that should be form, not from, form of nostalgia that will, quote, hasten the inner disintegration of Jewish life, unquote, as many Jews abandon their heritage because of its archaic views. For Kaplan, a Siddur should state clearly, here it is, Carol, in both Hebrew and English, what a Jew ought to believe about God, Israel, and the Torah. And now he's quoting Mordechai Kaplan, as long as religious creeds retain their traditional wording, there is no way for worshipers to recognize that they are to be understood in a new fashion. So this is exactly what we were just talking about. And Kaplan with a C is quoting Kaplan with a K, saying, you know, this thing of telling yourself, well, I mean something different when I say these words, can only take you so far and has to be treated with care. And I guess, as I shared last week, this has become increasingly important to me over the course of my own career, because as I explained last week, that the analogy of food speaks to me. You know, if I want to build a healthy spirit, I have to feed my soul things that are good for it. I can't feed it things that either it can't use or that are actually not healthy. So it's okay for me to tell myself, well, I don't really mean this the way my ancestors meant it, or I don't really mean this the way it seems to say. I better be careful about that and choose things that are spiritually nourishing. Okay, so I'd like to keep going now, just down to the bottom part of this page. And this is just a compilation of some of the principles. What are the principles for liturgical change? So if you're going to say, well, I'm not sure I can accept this part of the liturgical canon, it's, as I'm saying, I don't think it's healthy for my soul, so I'm not going to keep saying it. It's teaching me things that I don't want to teach myself. Like it's teaching me that, for instance, if I use the example of the traditional Aleinu, where we're saying basically, thank you, God, for not making us like all the other nations of the earth, and for not, giving us our portion, making ours different from everyone else. And as we know in the really traditional version, that we say about the other religious traditions, that they bow down to hevel varik, to vapor and nothingness. I don't think it's good for us to say those words. I think we should say we're glad to be part of the human family. And yes, we have our own way of being part of that human family, but we don't want to affirm our tradition as being thankful that we're different, or thankful that we're better than, which is how that original formula was made. Okay, so if we're going to start to look at what if we want to make some changes, what are the principles for making those changes? So this is Eric Kaplan's. Now I've distilled him down, and you'll see there are 10 of them. So I'm just going to go through them quickly. In Reconstructionist ideology, the question about revelation. So this is quoting Kaplan now. The retention in our prayers of the Torah's own image of its origins perpetuates a myth that is untrue and causes undesirable tension between the Siddur text and modern beliefs. So the idea that the myth that is untrue is they're speaking directly about the revelation at Sinai, and saying, if we insist on marching around saying, V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai, we are upholding a myth that is a beautiful myth, but it's a myth, and we shouldn't be affirming it in our prayers, because in our prayers we're putting into language what we aspire to. Okay, so we can talk more about that. I'm just showing you where the two Kaplans come down. Okay, number 2, Messianism. Kaplan's God did not have the ability to suspend the natural order, and could not thus send a divine agent from the house of David who would bring about a miraculous redemption. Kaplan believed strongly that ultimately the world will be perfected, but only as a result of the combined efforts of humanity, of the humanity of generations. So this rejection of the Davidic messianic line, we're not going to pray for that because we don't believe that that's a thing. Okay, number 3, physical resurrection after death. The idea belonged to a supernatural worldview, which is rejected by modernity. We don't believe that the dead rise, so we won't say Mechaye Hametim. And David Saradsky is not here to speak about this, but I know this is a particular a facet of prayer that's really important to him, and he sees it very differently. Okay, number 4, the temple and sacrifices. While the sacrificial system once served as a vehicle for the expression of sincere religious emotion, it no longer speaks to the religious sensitivities of many moderns. And the example we have is that the Musaf liturgy, which many synagogues recite on Shabbat, we don't recite. And that's, at least originally it was, I don't want to say deleted, it was omitted from the Reconstructionist Siddur because of this notion that we don't hope to resurrect the temple sacrifices, so we're not going to engage in words that are about that. I'm going to skip number 5 and just go to number 6 for now. We're all familiar with this, the doctrine of divine election. Kaplan believed that the traditional image of the Jews as God's chosen people was theologically untenable and morally undesirable. So that's a big problem, and a place where we want to, as we're all familiar, fix it in the Siddur. Number 7, this is actually my favorite one, unedifying text. So if you can't find all these other issues, but you still have a trouble with this piece of text that's in your hand, if it's simply unedifying, you may want to take a look at it. The Siddur should be edifying, to reflect spiritually constructive religion, like a healthy meal. That's where I get my analogy. Occasionally, this motivated changes in the prayer book that do not fit easily with any of the other categories. Okay, so there's 3 more short ones here. They're short the way I've laid them out. So number 8, miracles and supernaturalism. Miracle talk, that should say, can have no basis in history and should be seen as products of the popular imagination. So anything that refers, for instance, to God splitting the Red Sea, We don't pray about that. We can read about it in the Torah. That's fine. It's in the Torah, but we don't put it in our prayers. Aesthetically, wanting to have a text that has an aesthetic beauty to it. And actually, Carol Mim has spoken to me about this several times, having a service that has an aesthetic quality to it. It's not just a bunch of stuff that we put together. And finally, and this really is part of aesthetics also, repetition and economy. So Kaplan believed that the Sabbath morning service should be no longer than 2 hours. I think finally, thanks to the pandemic, we've come close to his, or we've actually bypassed it. So I want to just look with you a little bit at this passage. I realize this is small. Can you see this? It's familiar. It's from the Shabbat service. It's from the weekday service. It's the passage that we say from the book of Numbers when we take the Torah out. Vayihi binsoa ha'aron vayomer Moshe, kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha. So just start with that much. When the ark, Aaron binsoa, was in motion, when it was traveling, when it was going forward, Moses would say, Kuma Adonai ve'yafutzu oivecha ve'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha. Rise up, God, and disperse your enemies and send away the haters from before you. And as you may have heard me raise questions about this, I'm just sharing my own struggles as someone who was, charged with leading our prayers much of the time. What are we to make of this? This is what our ancestors put in the Siddur for the moment when the Torah comes out. And it's funny, I remember Mim teaching me this many years ago. This was connected to our ancestors' beliefs in ancient times, that as long as they had the ark with them, they would be protected from any adversaries coming at them, wherever they were trying to go. That the ark sort of had magical powers and could help them make their way forward safely. So I just want to pause and check in with you all who are here tonight. If you ask yourself this question, the Torah is about to be brought out of the ark into the community. What is the feeling that you would want the community to have? In fact, let me turn off the share here for a minute. What's a word that comes up? If you could say, this is the thing I would wish for the community to feel at this moment. What are the words that come up for you? Go ahead, Larry.
Safe space, which I think, whatever it is that is unsafe, let's sort of clear that out of the way. And that's the way I interpret this passage.
Okay, no, I'm not asking you to interpret the passage. I'm asking, what do you feel, or what do you wish for the community to feel when the Torah is being brought out?
Well, maybe sacred space.
Okay, sacred space. Go ahead, Shelley.
Connection to all other Jews, both in time and in space.
Okay, so a really strong sense of peoplehood,
yeah,
across time and space, across generations. And David or Shulamit, you're agreeing with that. Okay, so like a really strong sense of peoplehood. What else? Go ahead, Bob Singer.
I have the feeling of reverence, just sort of amazement that this belonged to my great grandfather, and we still have it. We don't have much else from that long ago, but this is something that's been passed down, and really it's kind of amazing, to still have it. So it's really something special about it. It's awesome.
So reverence, awe. Yeah, Luther, you're saying Nora, awe. Go ahead, Amy, what else?
I was going to say enlightenment, because I feel like when we read the Torah and discuss it, I always learn something new, and I feel like we all get a new perspective.
Excuse me. Yeah, so insight, enlightenment, great. Maybe one or two more, anybody else? Sid, the question is, what do you feel, or what would you wish for the congregation to feel when the Torah is being brought from the ark? See if you want to chime in.
Well, I would like the visual image. The Torah covers that we have three different forms of truth on it. And it's Binah, Chokhmah, and De'ah.
Mhm.
And if you look closely at the Torah covers, they all are woven together with the term emet.
Mhm.
And given what we've just lived through for the past 4 years, to hold up the notion of truth in all of its manifestations as manifested through Torah is a
Mhm.
pretty powerful signal and metaphor.
Beautiful. Thank you. Boy, I miss those Torah covers. I really just listening to you talk about them. We don't get to see them very much. We hopefully will again soon. Okay, so you can hear some of the things that are coming out of all of you: peoplehood, awe, truth, enlightenment. I thought somebody might say love. I didn't hear that one come up, but that's sometimes how I feel. So I just have to ask you now, given the things that you've articulated, do you stand by this? Vayhi bin soa ha'aron vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yonusu mesanecha mipanecha. Is this what you want to say? And I'm not going to take a survey right now, but I'm sharing with you that that's been difficult for me across many years to say these words when what I really want to say is, what a powerful moment of peoplehood this is, or what a powerful, awesome moment of reverence and connection with our ancestors, or what a moment of summoning truth for our people and for our study. I don't know. So look with me here. A little bit of commentary from Sifrei, one of our oldest commentaries. And this is just taken right out of the Eitz Chaim Chumash. During our years of wandering, exile, and persecution, when we were vulnerable to those who sought to do us harm, our prayer was, Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha. During tranquil times when the danger is not persecution, but assimilation, our prayer is a homiletic interpretation of the next verse. Now they're quoting what we say at the end of the Torah service. These verses are familiar from the service of taking the Torah from the ark and returning it to the ark before and after the Torah reading. This is Sifrei talking. Does God have enemies? Anyone who hates the Jewish people because we strive to do the will of God is an enemy of God. That may be the case, I don't know. But I feel that when I'm taking the Torah from the ark, I don't really want to think about God's enemies. That's not where I want my soul to be pointing. That's not where I want my spirit to be doing its exercise. I want to focus on the things that you all brought up. So here are some alternatives. So Rabbi Marsha Prager quoted Reb Zalman Schechter Shalomi, who, as she said, transformed this verse for her. He said, Reb Zalman said, and he's playing on the language here, Oyevecha means your enemies, this little word here. He said, think of it this way, may your oives be scattered. You hear the word play that he's doing, Oyevecha in Hebrew and oives in Yiddish. Everything that drains your cup, everything that gives your heart an oive. So he's in favor, Reb Zalman, of keeping the liturgy as it is and just reinterpreting it, as we were talking about before. And she adds, I often translate this as may the forces of negativity be scattered as the Torah comes out. Okay, you can see in our own Kol HaNeshama Sidur that our editors struggled with this also. Because in the place where we lift the Torah, in the place where we say these words, Vayhi bin soa ha'aron, they offer this as an alternative from Psalm 118. Instead of saying Vayhi bin soa, they say, you can say this instead. Pitchu li sha'arei tzedek avovam odeya. Open for me the gateways of justice. I will come forward and give thanks. I want to share that a few years ago, I actually contacted Eric Kaplan and David Teutsch, Rabbi David Teutsch, to say, what is the story with this? Of all the changes that Kol HaNeshama worked with, why did nobody look at this? And furthermore, why not in the 1940s was this not addressed? And nobody could come up with an answer other than, we don't really know. We just didn't think about this. So I came up with an alternative that I like, but I'm actually going to stop this part of the discussion and move on, because I want us to be able to look ahead with some of the background that we just absorbed in looking at these principles and the questions about what are we talking about when we're bringing the Torah out, when we're reenacting this moment of revelation at Sinai.
Rachel, Rabbi Manny put something really nice in the chat that you may want to take a look at. Not sure you could see it when you're teaching.
You know, I can't believe that Rabbi Manny has been here the whole time, and I didn't realize that this was our Manny. So let's see. Thank you, Audrey. In the Torah, we have a visible symbol of our people's quest for life's meaning and direction, and an eternal sign of it is of its covenant with God. As we raise the scroll and carry it aloft, and as we express our respect and affection for it, we link our own lives today with this millennial quest and everlasting covenant. How beautiful. Thank you. So Rabbi Manny, I don't know if you feel comfortable to chime in, but can you harmonize this beautiful thing that you wrote with Vayehi Binsoa? I'll ask you that, and if you feel like typing in the chat, we'd be curious to hear your thoughts about that. Thank you, and thank you, Audrey, for pointing that out to me. Okay.
I think you might want to say something.
Oh, great. Okay, let's hear something.
No, you don't want to say it?
Or Manny, do you want to just tell Mirala and she can tell us?
Okay.
Tell me.
You need something to say when you take the Torah from the ark.
You need something to say when you take the Torah from the ark.
Amen. But does it have to be that?
That's what I want to say. That's based on Adlul Adonai iti u'romem Hashemo yachdav. That's why it's there. I'm not trying to harmonize it with the past. It's contemporary worship that I start from. Then I go back. Mirala will send you the first half of it.
Okay. Okay.
Half that you have there.
I didn't want to type the entire thing in there.
Okay. Well, we'd still be happy to see it. So just so people catch the reference that Manny's making, I think, Gadlu Ladonai Iti is that little third line when we have in the Torah service, the Shema and Echad Eloheinu, and that last line, when the person carrying the Torah is saying to the congregation, I'm getting ready to come around during the procession. Join me in magnifying God's name. Gadlu Ladonai Iti. Gadlu, to expand or magnify Adonai Iti with me. I'm coming with the Torah. Let's do this together. Okay.
I'm gonna use,
Okay, now I want to switch over and look with you. Okay, Larry, what do you want to say about that? Why is that? What do you want to say about bowing?
You're muted, Larry.
It's an amazing expression it's a beautiful bodily, physical expression of humility that means so much. It's with your body, and you're with the Torah. You've got the Torah in your hand, and somebody's up there bowing, and you're bowing with them. It's like, as a community, we're expressing a degree of humility in the face of these words and what they might mean for us together.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, take a look with me now here. Now you should be able to see it, and hopefully this is bigger, so it's a little easier to see. This is from Herb's book, and he's also struggling with the question of to what extent is this about God, God's enemies, God's friends, and to what extent is it just about our journey together as a people? Okay, so it's obviously here in English and in Hebrew. He says, Zot HaTorah, and you have to hear, and I'm sorry, I can't get rid of this little Zoom thingy up here at the top, but Zot HaTorah, your brain right away goes, V'zot HaTorah. Oh, but now he's going to change it on us. Shenichteva al yedei bnei Adam, written by human beings. Meshech dorot dorot, Shasam Ezra lifnei b'nei Yisrael. Over many generations, which Ezra, our first kind of proto-rabbi, placed before the children of Israel, b'shem Moshe, in the name of Moses. Shasikem Hazaken Hillel, which was then distilled, summarized by Hillel the elder, me'ot shanim achrei Ezra, 100 years later, after Ezra. Ma shesan'u alecha al ta'aseh lechavrecha. What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. V'hayeter perush shechedai lilmod. The rest is commentary that's worth studying. V'achar kach ta'aseh ma shetzarich. And afterwards, do what needs doing. And I'm just going to keep going for this remaining stanza. Avotenu tzadku kshe'amru shemitzvah goreret mitzvah avera avera. Our ancestors were tzadku, righteous, when they said one mitzvah leads to another, and likewise one misdeed to another. Et ze ani yodea mishkiot chayai. This I know from the missteps of my own life. Eni ma'amin b'mitzaveh. I don't believe in a mitzaveh, a commander. Aval lashon sivui mazkirali shehamitzvot nimseru leyadenu litzarfenu kekesef biyad hatzoref kezahav nivdal mibdilo. I don't believe in a commander, but this language of commandment reminds me, ties me to the important central pillar of Jewish tradition, that the mitzvot were transmitted into our hands to refine us, like silver in the hands of a silversmith, like gold separated from its, I think he says dross in English, from its, what do you say? The part that we don't need.
Dross.
Dross, yeah. So let me go back now to the top. When I first read this, I thought, I would like to take this first stanza and use this as a Torah service right here. And I guess part of what called out to me is the way he lifts up, first of all, the fact that the Torah is absolutely precious to us, central to us, but in fact, it was written by human beings. And to continue to say that the Torah was written by Moses in our prayers, it's one thing to read it in the Torah and say, okay, this is what our ancestors wrote, they believed, it's an important myth, sacred myth. But to then transmit it into our prayers, into our prayer book, which again, when we say something in the language of prayer, we're aspiring to it. This is what we hold up as our highest truth. So we want to be careful to say the things that we really believe. Maybe you believe something different, and I'm not disputing that, but for me, it's a source of love and pride to say, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. The Torah came forth from Zion. You might say inspired by God, but I feel so much those feelings that you all talked about before. Peoplehood, awe, enlightenment when I connect with this lineage that Ezra put before the children of Israel. Ezra, who was the leader of the people when they came back from exile. Ezra, who helped to oversee a whole change, a whole movement that led from a transformation from a priestly Judaism into a rabbinic Judaism. We never mention that part in our prayers. So the fact that Herb is suggesting, you might want to mention that here might be worth your while. And then we keep going and we bring Hillel into the picture. Hillel, who carried picked up the you know what I'm trying to say, the relay, picked up the baton 100 years later and distilled it all into this. Do unto others the way you would want to be done to you. And the rest is commentary. Go and study, and do what needs to be done based on what you study. Okay, so let me pause there first and just ask for your responses, and I see how can I do this. I'm not asking for a critique of Herb's work. I'm not placing it here as the be all end all of liturgical change, but just what about the idea of revelation being perhaps not God-centered, but peoplehood-centered? Is that a possibility for us? And if so, how, or if not, how not? Sid, go ahead.
This passage reminds me of a line. One of my early teachers of Bible was Professor Sam Avery, who used to say that the Torah is not great because it's divine because it's great, which was kind of a secularized way of saying that just because you don't acknowledge the original myth of Judaism, that Torah was God-given at Sinai, doesn't invalidate the value, the beauty, the divinity, capital D, of the Torah.
Great, thank you, thank you. Go ahead, Audrey.
I love what Herb did in terms of making it very literal, but I go back to the fact that the reason that we celebrate this, we love it, we adore it, is because of the history that we become familiar with, and we love it even more as a result of knowing it and studying it and understanding the history. And I think that's the implication when we say the words that we say, is that adoration is for the history. And what the poetry does, like I said, it makes it just really literal. And I'm not sure that we need that literal every time we take the Torah out.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Audrey, but I hear you pointing in part to when we were looking at that list of principles, and one of them was aesthetic beauty, and there's real value in that. It's not just aesthetics, so to speak. It really shapes how we experience the
Right.
ideas.
It's the same way when we take it out into the community. It's our protection, as if the ark was a shield. It's the words that are a shield. It's the teachings that are a shield that make us unique to bring it out into the community.
But a shield against what?
I think there's always been, we're always kind of feeling like we're at risk of something. We as a minority community, in many respects, are at risk, that feel that we have to, protect ourselves. And maybe the words of the Torah are those words, the teachings of the Torah, all the goodness and all the learning and all of the cautionary tales are what we have to protect ourselves as we go out. Maybe not to protect ourselves against an enemy, but to protect ourselves and to be wise as we step out into the greater community. That's what I would say.
I'd like to come back to that need to protect ourselves if we have time, because I think there's a very important thing there to try to wrestle with. Luther, go ahead.
Okay, we don't really have to be literal. I would agree with Audrey about that, because it's not always aesthetically pleasing when we are. But the core of this concept to me it's the core of everything. It was human beings, it was human minds wandering around in the desert and looking up at the stars and wondering how they came to be there. And why am I here looking at these stars? That to me is I'm making something concrete in order to say there's something beyond concreteness that moved the human mind and the human spirit to compose this document that we now call the Torah, and all that accompanies it. And that's what's awesome and filled with Norah about those scrolls. Human beings made that document.
Yeah. So we don't want to slip into like worshiping human beings. That's not the point, obviously. But what I'm hearing from you, and what I appreciated so much about what Herb is giving us here, is to put the human experience at the center of this appreciation and not
Yeah.
necessarily the divine
Yeah.
inspiration. That way. Larry, go ahead. And then Carol, are you going to say something too? I can't see everyone, so please use the hand raising function if you want to say something. Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you so much, Luther. I totally am with you here. I just have to say that recently I've had tried to get, it's almost like there's a thread, you know, starting with these Hebrew tribes in the highlands, you know, in the 1100, 1200 BC. And, you know, they came up with all these stories, and different tribes, different parts of these people came up with different stories. And it's such a complex story, you know, when you go and just trying to find the thread through it all for me personally, is really complex, but really important, but it's not poetic to me. You know, it's amazing how human beings have done this, just like you're saying, Luther. Yet, I want poetry and this Norah element, and I don't get it from this particular passage, you know, here that you know, that Herb is offering us. So I'm looking for something that's going to fill me with this Norah sense, and at the same time, independently, I'm looking for this human thread through the complexity of our history, but they seem to be parallel efforts in my mind.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, Carol.
So a couple things. First of all, our prayer book does not put Asher Moshe as, that's the second choice. The Eitz Chaim choice is the first choice. That's the one that we always say.
Right.
And many other congregations.
You and Mim say.
Yes, and George and Sue and Chaya and Mike and many others in our neighborhood when we're sitting in shul, we always say the Eitz Chaim version. I spend a lot of time in this prayer book praying below the line. I would love this to be below the line on that page because I love it. But I would not substitute it for the Eitz Chaim that I would say.
Right. So just so everybody knows what Carol's talking about.
Page 407, if you have your prayer book.
You have your Siddur. In the place where we would normally be lifting the Torah and saying, Vizot Torah asher sam Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael pi Adonai. The Reconstructionist Siddur offers Vizot Torah Eitz Chaim hi, and the rest of it. So it's a way of just skirting around this.
And if you travel to other Reconstructionist shuls, many use the Eitz Chaim.
Interesting.
Yes.
Good to know. Okay, good. All right. I just want to look with you a little bit before we close out for tonight, which is momentarily, at this bottom part. So here he's quoting from Mishnah Avot, mitzvah goreret mitzvah. He says, I get that one mitzvah helps us to lead to another one, and likewise the reciprocal. And all I need to do is look into the truth of my own life to see that that's true. And then he comes here to this line. Ani eini ma'amin b'mitzaveh. I don't believe in a commander. Aval lashon sivui, except the language of commandment is something that I don't want to lose. And I just am curious about that. I'm going to stop the share now and just come back to us. Can you differentiate between those two, or can they coexist? Can you say, I don't really feel comfortable with the idea that there's a commanding presence in the world telling me what to do. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to live without commandment. I wouldn't want to live without mitzvah, because it provides me a structure through which to refine myself and for our people to refine ourselves. Just curious. Go ahead, Larry.
So I've been in this group with Rami Shapiro for the last several months, and he's going through his World Wisdom Bible now. And, so we had this conversation just this past Monday night, And I basically was pushing, and I feel a little funny about this, the Art Green sense that, you know, you can think of a commander, you can think of a you, of an ata, you can think of a personal God, but parallel with that, you know, that you realize that that could be a projection of yours. It probably is a projection. We don't know what it is. It's just something we do.
Excuse me.
And, but in terms of this unknowable thinking, something that Luther just described, that's really what we're trying to get in touch with, but we need the dialogic, the Buberian approach to this whole thing.
I and thou, right.
Yeah, and people do argue it's okay to not be consistent. I think Kaplan really needed to be consistent, but some people argue you don't have to be consistent, and I'm not sure. I'm struggling with this a bit myself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Go ahead, Sid, and I'll just show you one last thing before we say goodnight.
Well, on this topic, I would highly recommend the article, which we should probably pull out, reprint, and circulate in the right settings. It appeared in the Reconstruction magazine back in the 1980s. It was translated from the Hebrew by Mordechai Bar-On, B-A-R-O-N. Maybe familiar, he wore many hats in Israel. He was actually one of the early founders of Shalom Achshav, Peace Now. For a large part of his career, he was, I think, a major general in the Israeli army, and he was the chief educational officer for Tzal, for the Israeli IDF, Israel Defense Forces. He wrote an article called, translated into English, "The Commander and the Commandments," in which he makes this exact argument. He was writing not for Reconstruction's audience. He was writing for Israelis, for the most part, who were secular, but he was trying to allow them to access the richness of the tradition, which a lot of Israelis have a hard time doing because the oppressiveness of orthodoxy drove many Israelis into a secular camp where they didn't want anything of God or tradition. But it's actually in the Reconstruction magazine, the only time in my memory, it ran in 3 successive months because it was a fairly long piece and they had a word limit in terms of how many articles they wanted to run. But it is a brilliant exposition from a totally different context. It's written from an Israeli perspective. But it would be a great thing for, in some context on that Shalom, for us to read and study and
It really sounds amazing. Say his name again.
Mordechai Bar-On, B-A-R-O-N.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have a full set of the Reconstruction magazine in our library, so we could find it actually.
Yes. If we ever get back to our library, yes. Okay, one last thing to show you. And this, if you were at services a few weeks ago, the Shabbat of the New Year, you would have seen this. So this is, again, this is from Herb Levine. Can I get this to go away? There. So this is option number 3 could be, you know, if the full traditional version is V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai, and as Carol was saying, the Reconstructionists offer us V'zot HaTorah etz chaim hi lamachazikim ba. Herb suggests this. V'zot HaTorah asher sam Ezra lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Mesorah Yad Moshe. This is the Torah that was placed by Ezra before the children of Israel, according to tradition, by way of Moses. So in this formula, we don't totally lose the sacred myth, but we also can be in the room even if we really struggle with the notion of God. We can still participate in the Torah service and share our sense of awe, love, reverence, you know, gratitude for the enlightenment that comes, the truth that comes from the Torah. So that Shabbat of the New Year, where I was sharing some different liturgical formulations, I thought, okay, well, I've really hit on something here because this is the reaction I got. A number of people really loved the things that we shared. And one person said, I like them, but with certain caveats. And one person said, if you continue to do this, I'll have to leave the congregation. So I thought, okay, well, that's a good, that's a good, a spread out reaction. And Manny, you're saying, what about Asher Sam Yisrael? Meaning just to give credit to the Jewish people? Can you explain what do you mean by Asher Sam Yisrael? Yes. Yeah, it just doesn't fit as phonemically as beautifully as Ezra.
It was the creation of the Jewish people, not of Ezra or of Moses.
Correct. Here. Well, I really appreciate you all tuning in tonight on this amazing inauguration night. And I think we'll be back up to our fuller size next week. We'll have her back with us and we'll be looking at redemption and the various questions we have about it from a Reconstructionist perspective and also just from a humanist leading perspective. I hope everybody stays well, and I don't know, can we sing? God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above.
Yay.
Thank you, Rachel.
Everybody,
back.
stay well. See you soon.
Thank you, Rachel.